welcome to Crypto. My God, the market is in a flare up. I am praying to God it's not just GameStop using that new billion-dollar stash to one-shot this thing, because that would blow. But who the fuck knows? Anyway, there's a lot of things going on around stablecoins, a bit of a war, in fact. And it's really important because we are looking at the new format of the dollar, and what that means globally is still yet unseen. So let's get into it. Stablecoin history goes way back to early Bitcoin days. Now, when Bitcoin first started trading, the way that you would get it was really peer-to-peer mechanics. I bought mine off of dudes in back alleys at Bitcoin meetups, and you sort of hope it worked. But you could also get onto like local CoinSwap and a variety of other P2P exchanges where really you're just reaching out to someone and being like, hey, if I send you some cash, will you send me some Bitcoin? I mean, this is how Mt. Gox worked. You had to actually send a money order to those guys in Japan. I mean, Magic the Gathering online exchange, that's what it was called. And I remember being like, people are sending money to this fucking thing? Now it collapsed, so that kind of goes to show you where that was at. But the issue, and what I'm trying to drive at here, is that it was actually quite difficult to be trading Bitcoin, right? There was no on-chain mechanism. There was no way, if you actually wanted to trade it, right, to sort of exit when it was high, you know, buy low, sell high kind of thing. Like, how do you actually facilitate that through this network? And that's where Tether comes into play. The original stablecoin with a giant history of questionable actions. And Tether has come with a lot of FUD. If you've been in this industry throughout the many past years, I mean, I'm going to say the past decade, you've definitely been at a dinner table with someone running their fingers through their hair, totally stressed out, breaking down how Tether is going to destroy the foundational value of Bitcoin. And that is because Tether, as the first stablecoin, became the way that people sort of moved in and out of the asset. And the thesis being that if Tether was unbacked, that basically everyone holding it and everyone buying Bitcoin with it, it would pull the rug out from under them all. So this is a great article that I found from Decrypt. And this is coming from 2021, so it's actually a long time ago, but the Tether controversy, a brief history. And a lot of the controversial stuff happens way earlier than 2021. So this should work just fine for conveying that message. And over the years, I mean, there's just been so much of it, right? This great article from Jake Chervinsky saying, is this behind all the Tether panic? And whether you're in 2016, 2017, all the way through to the 2020 bull run, 2021 here, there was frequent concerns that Tether was full of shit. Basically, that they were not backing every USDT with a one-to-one dollar. There was embroilment in the Bitfinex scandal, which was basically a giant Ponzi scheme, and they had a lot of cash tied up in Tether, and they basically were accused of using the actual dollars as a slush fund to cover up their malfeasance. But while the actual Tether assets maintained, you know, claims of one-to-one kind of reality. So anyway, it goes so far back. There's been these existential fears of Tether, the company, for such a long time. Now let's fast forward to the modern era. Tether's kind of gotten over it. It's proven to be one of the most profitable companies in the history of mankind. What they're doing is they're saying, hey, you give us $1, we will issue you 1 USDT. They take all of those dollars and they buy bonds and T-bills, and they earn yield on that. And one of the most genius things about this business is it's so early, it's really just a money market fund, something that's pretty basic for anyone that invests in stocks. The only thing is a money market fund will return that yield. It's doing the same kind of product idea. These stablecoins don't have to do that. There's no obligation for them to grow yield on your holdings. And in fact, the regulation coming out from the government is going to disincentivize that, right? They're basically saying if it can grow yield like a money market fund, it will compete with the banks. This is the same thing they said about similar funds. So they're actually being solidified as this kind of company that says, hey, we'll take $1, we'll earn yield off of it, and we'll only give you $1 back. The trade-off being that your new dollar is now on-chain and it can take advantage of the digital economy. And, you know, suffice it to say, these are great for trading in and out of cryptocurrencies. Then you don't really care about that yield appreciation. But if you're going to store any sort of wealth in a stablecoin, you're losing. It's a bad deal. You should go to a money market fund. It's very black and white there. You are getting the losing end of that trade. Now, back to the Tether FUD, I mean, there was all this chaos. Like I said, it's gone forever. I've heard how Tether is going to take down the cryptocurrency industry just so many goddamn times that if anyone FUDs it now, it's just like, yawn, bro. Like, been there, done that. And Tether has done a better job of transparency. So I'm on the Tether website right now. All you have to do is click on transparency. It's right to the left of the login. And they start to go into a little bit more about the funds that they have in reserve. You can look at current balances. You can look at reports and reserves. And they have these independent audit reports. And of course, simply put, you know, if you trust their website, you have the total assets, you have the total liabilities, and the net equity. So everything is more or less out there. I think Tether is not so much of a concern. And let's keep in mind, global adoption of stablecoins, it's happening on Tether. So outside of the United States, people that are looking to hold their savings in a currency. And again, these people aren't looking for yield. They're looking to avoid the hyperinflation of their local currency. So this is South America, Latin America. This is Africa. These people are the biggest users of USDT, Tether. This is actually why the entire Tron chain, which is just a shitty fork of Ethereum, has picked up so much steam in the African continent, because it's cheaper than ETH, it's fast, and basically they use it to pass Tether, right? They've leapfrogged the mobile era, and they've really become accustomed to, again, digitization and everything that can happen from a cell phone. This is a perfect setup for that. So if you go and you look at Tron and the utility of the network, it's basically bolstered by stablecoin transactions. And for those who don't know, Tron is founded by Justin Sun. He bought the banana for $6 million, all that fun stuff. Now, in response to Tether and this whole idea of a one-to-one backed stablecoin, like, a lot of crypto people have looked at that and said, no, it's not really the point. We don't want to take dollars. We don't want to just move the financial system on chain. And this is in the past. I would say this is exactly what's happening right now. But in the past, cryptocurrency people, really libertarians, were like, no, fuck that noise. We want to replace all of this. We're looking for better mechanisms. Enter MakerDAO, now really called Maker and even more rebranded as Sky. But Maker comes out around the 2017 era, and they come up with this concept called DAI, and they're looking for a more decentralized stablecoin. DAI is still really seeking to be worth $1, but they're doing it through a basket of assets. They have a giant treasury. They've done a fantastic job at managing it. And basically they said, we want to offer this alternative to a single dollar-to-dollar backed asset, and it's backed by a wider variety of things that they can actually adjust, right? They do actively manage this portfolio to try to keep DAI in nice profit so that they can basically guarantee that one-to-one peg. And if we want to learn a little bit farther, the S&P Global Ratings does have audits for USDS/DAI. Now, USDS is USD Sky. Again, it's just really the rebranding for DAI. They're both worth one for one, and you can trade DAI to Sky now, and it's just a branding thing. So when we look into the audit, we can begin to see the vaults that they hold the majority of their assets in. So part of the end game strategic plan, this is really an update with the Sky rebrand. USDS was launched, and a lot of the end game thing is kind of a governance mechanic. Now, MakerDAO is a decentralized autonomous organization, so it is basically volunteer based. Now, those volunteers can get paid over time. They make proposals to the DAO, but this is governance. This is very similar to like a little mini state, right? People vote, it's democratic. They have to make proposals in public, and they have to earn their just desserts. So when they make moves, when they reallocate capital, all of this is happening visibly, transparently. And what we can see when we look at a lot of their vaults now is crypto-related vaults at around $1 billion, 21% of the reserves. A lot of it is ETH, so I don't really know how great that's been working for them. They've got 32% in like other crypto assets. We see it in minted and depositing in Athena's USDE. So Athena, again, is like a hedge fund strategy wrapped in a programmatic layer. So if they can lend their DAI into that strategy, they can earn yield. And this is where Maker has been really good. They've been at the core of DeFi, and they've leveraged a lot of their assets to actually generate more utility through borrowing and lending, or through things like this, trading activity, to actually generate revenue. So they're very good at that. It's got some wrapped Bitcoin, all that fun stuff. And as we continue to go, we see a Block Tower Andromeda Vault, which is really short-term treasury bills of up to 6 months, things like that, some securities, and of course, stablecoins, right? This was probably a contentious move. It's 1.5% of the reserve, but we do see USDC, a very centralized stablecoin in there. One of the concerns being, right, DAI, how can we say that you're decentralized if you're backed by centralized assets? Whatever. They're moving on. They're thriving. I think they're being okay. So we are seeing this decentralization theme sort of bleed out a little bit for the sake of sanity, I would say. But they are trying to maintain themselves as a core business and, you know, maybe putting a little bit in like a stable asset that is like actually stable. And I mean that on a fundamental level, not stable coins, not the worst thing in the world. So for the longest time, we've had Tether and we've had DAI, and DAI has had its own problems because anyone who's been through DAO governance has learned what a fucking clusterfuck that is. It's chaotic, but they're probably one of the best executors of governance that's out there. I would say MakerDAO and AaveDAO stand out. If you ever want to study effective governance, I mean, there's near infinite bad case studies, but those two are going to be positive and they're going to show you some of the light. So for the longest time, we've had this competition, right? I'm not even including Circle in here, even though I've kind of circled it into Sky. Haha, but then we have the launch of Circle, and Circle's come out, and it's just very much a bank-like product, right? They're good Americans, they're well-regulated, and what they do is the same thing as Tether. They take $1 and they earn the yield, but they're doing it inside the United States. So we ironically have this split where people look at USDC as sort of the regulated American coin. And that is viewed positively inside the US. So people like banks, people like financial institutions, they like this regulation. Now, people outside the US, like those Africans, those Latin Americans, they're like, no. We don't like it because you might rug us and we can't tell what's going on there. So they much prefer Tether. In some way, Tether is, unironically, the untethered US dollar. Now, of course, they're both backed with US dollars, so they're practically the same business. It's really just their approach to the markets that differ and differ greatly. And Tether has such a phenomenal lead on Circle that their coffers are like quite huge, but we are seeing a war start to break out. There are real fights going on. Now, when we get into stables, I mean, I would be remiss to remark upon the holy grail of the algorithmic stable. And this was something that DAI was sort of pursuing and ended up pivoting away from. But we have the clear understanding of what a one-to-one backed stablecoin is. There were manifold experiments in the cryptocurrency industry for the coveted algorithmic stablecoin. And that is not taking in US dollars to put out $1 of stablecoin. The idea being, can we create an algorithm that either through trade mechanics, buying and selling, leverage, et cetera, can we create stability algorithmically through a mathematical equation, not through storing dollars in a vault? This would take away custody concerns. This would really make on-chain functions work from A to Z inside the stablecoin ecosystem. And last cycle, we had the explosion of Terra Luna. And I mean explosion in two ways, actually. First, it explodes up. And let's just look at Luna's ecosystem. So there's two things here. There is Luna, the blockchain upon which Terra, the dollar, sat. And this was basically, conceptually, an entire blockchain built around DeFi, trying to challenge the entire financial ecosystem with this algorithmic stablecoin at the center. The problem was the stablecoin had a sub-protocol called Anchor that offered 20% yield. You could take any of your savings, you could hold it in the stablecoin, and you could earn 20% yield on your life savings. It sounds amazing, right? The real question was, where does this yield come from? And it turned out it was all fake. It was a lot of bullshit. Now, you can see the absolute explosive force starting in January of 2021 of the Luna ecosystem, right? It does a over 100x, getting to above $100. I know people that had like $100 million in this. They thought they had made it. They moved to Puerto Rico. They changed their entire life, right? This is serious wealth. And of course, what do they got now? Zero. So there's a lot of pain to be learned through this lesson, and obviously a lot of expectation management and readjustment. But for the longest time, and this was due to their founder, Do Kwon, a really boisterous, bombastic South Korean dude who was really aggressive with his tone and very challenging and confident. And I mean, if you really want to get into a fun story, I recommend this website from the family office. Sure, I don't really know who they are, but I'm just going to throw this out there. I think they did a good summary. But we just went through this crazy explosion. And of course, Luna is happening in tandem with Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX, right? So there's a lot of actual cooperation. And we know that Sam was also sort of using his funds in not the best way. It's not that FTX actually didn't have the money. It's that the way they managed it was so loose and so ridiculous, and they were using investor funds for their own gains. So this is where the problem starts to happen. And this is why the 2022 blow up was so aggressive. You have the Luna explosion, which is directly tied to FTX, which collapses FTX, FTX being one of the largest exchanges. You have all this wealth just being suddenly zeroed out. And you have what created one of the most depressing scenes in cryptocurrency history. So Luna was sort of the final nail in the coffin for the algorithmic stablecoin explosion. And the reason for this being that we got so much hype behind it, and then at the end of the day, it proved to be total fraud. People have sort of concluded that the algorithmic stablecoins, they just don't work. The risk is so fucking high, and that we may as well turn our attention to the utility of asset-backed one-for-one stablecoins. Of course, one of the ideas behind an algorithmic one is that as it generates yield, it can return that to the user base. It's an algorithm at the center, right? It's a blockchain. It doesn't need funds itself. It can share its wealth. This is a very big departure from what we're seeing with the asset-backed coins, which are a wealth capture or a revenue capture mechanism, right? Circle and Tether are the ones making all the money, even though we're the users and we're the ones providing the capital that they use to generate that yield. So we've got Luna's rise and fall, and there's still fallout even to today, right? Galaxy Digital reaches a $200 million settlement over the Luna token. And the core of the story here was that Galaxy was actually exiting their positions at the same time as Mike is getting this tattoo of the Luna wolf on his arm, right? So it's a cross signal. They're basically getting caught lying, to their investor base. And this is all part of the explosion of Luna. So that has just been a wild, wild trip. And that kind of returns the field to just USDC and USDT, USD Circle and USD Tether. There's been some amazing releases since, right? We have PayPal releasing SciUSD, so they're in the game, but PayPal also has a great advantage of blockchain. They move money as a business, and that costs a lot. So just even moving their costs on chain reduces the fees that they have to pay. Their CapEx comes down. I mean, PayPal wins tremendously from that move without getting in the fight, right? It's not existential to their business. It just gives it a huge shot in the arm. Now we have come to a point in time where Circle is filing for an IPO, right? They're being as American as American Pie, and they're going public with it. And this really sets the stage for kind of the battle that's going on now and how we view stablecoins. And like I said, I mean, stablecoins are weaponizing the US dollar. For the first time in history, a fiat currency that is considered the global dominant currency can be earned by anyone. Anyone in those more deficient regions, fiscally speaking, can now hold the dominant currency. They can do so without having to take on the expense of remittance fees, right? They can send it globally in seconds for just cheap, just the cost of gas. So this is unlocking a major utility to the dollar itself. And the dollar, as we can see with Tether and their transparency, I mean, it's way bigger, right? We have dollars, we got euros, we got Mexico, and yeah, whatever. We got gold in Tether. That's pretty cool. Okay, but anyway, back to where I'm at. We now see that Circle is stepping themselves up. They are coming for the throne, right? This is a battle between titans. The titans are Circle, and they are Tether. Now comes to sort of the point where, there's a lot of lobbying going on, and there's a lot of presence in Washington and abroad coming from these stablecoin issuers. I'll be honest, this Cointelegraph article, I mean, it feels like it wants to make a lot of hype, but like $1.3 million lobbying Congress, I don't know, seems like pennies to me. But we can see this is a major component in the political activism of the cryptocurrency industry. Stablecoin issuers, they've hit this golden goose, right, of the one-to-one backed asset where they keep all the yield. And they, of course, want to pave ways to continue to do this. Under Gary Gensler and the Biden admin, there was a lot of pushback. They did not want to see these things thrive. And that was mostly because of their interpretation of cryptocurrencies as just being a bad thing. I've said this before, I will say it again. This is simply the digitization of finance. It is inevitable. It's very simple. Sure, there's a lot of bullshit wrapped around that, but ignore that because the core of it is just digitizing finance. So we begin to see these increased lobbying efforts and all of this sort of mania, both in DC and, very importantly, in Europe, another major market that is looking at, again, the upgrade to the system. And this all comes back to the SEC's reluctance to regulate and other countries sort of pushing forward. I've talked about Hong Kong in the past, and I've worked with them on ETFs to say, hey, if they won't do it where I'm from, maybe you can get a fire lit under their butts, right? Europe actually just kind of took a more sober approach and was like, we're not as anti-crypto as Gary Gensler, and we're going to figure something out. So that brings us to a more like immediate kind of conflict, which is that Circle has embraced these new EU rules as the European Union has kind of devised what the compliant regiment looks like. Circle has had a very heavy hand in it, and this is coming to fruition today. And this all comes through what is called the MiCA laws, which is Europe's compliant rule set for cryptocurrencies, stablecoin assets, anything on blockchain technology. Now, I'll be honest, I find MiCA to like not be the thing that lights my fire. So I'm just going to hop into Perplexity real quick and say, hey, brother, can you break it down for me? So the scope and objectives of MiCA is a couple things, and they all sound pretty straightforward on the top level, right? Like, are these commodity tokens like gas tokens? Are these currency tokens like stablecoins? Obviously, a unified licensing framework. I mean, this is where the US got really aggressive, was the broker rule, which I've covered. And we cover a lot of that. AML, I mean, that's something in finance that you kind of got to do. Consumer protection, market integrity, stablecoin regulation, and reverse solicitation. So these are all things that are like very present in securities markets and traditional finance, but they just don't exist in cryptocurrency because, you know, Wild West kind of stuff. So as we continue to kind of dive into it, one of the things that people really do complain about is the quality of the banks that these issuers are forced to hold their dollars or their euros or their collateral in. Now, here we have smaller stablecoins must hold at least 30% of their reserves in commercial banks, while significant ones, over $5 billion in euros or 10 million users, I mean, you could bot users, that's a weird stat for me, they must hold 60%. And one of the things that I've seen is that the 60% holdings is in actually a lot of smaller banks. So there is some credit and counterparty risk, like we saw with Silicon Valley Bank, which was banking Circle. It actually caused a USDC depeg, and it happened over the weekend. So this depeg was unable to be rectified, a depeg being that USDC was worth less than $1. Now, I took advantage of it. I didn't have that much money at the time, but I did everything I could to buy under $1 circles or USDCs because I believed that the company was fine and that they would figure it out, and you just needed the banks to open on Monday and to get the money, right? So that play worked out phenomenally. You were able to buy USDC at like 60 cents and then on a Saturday, and on Monday it was worth $1. It was like a great trade. Again, I didn't have much to put in. I put in like a couple $1,000, made, you know, a couple $100, but I'll take what I can get, right? But it did give us a little visualization of the risk inherent to some of these banks. And some of the complaints about MiCA is the banks aren't super high quality and you're forcing people into this. And then like, what if there's a local bank run? And again, we saw it with Silicon Valley Bank. So it's not the most crazy concept. Now, one of the other things, Circle's going public. So they have to release this very in-depth, basically an audit report. It's called an S1, and that's a public filing for an IPO. And if we do dive into it, we see something crazy, which is, if you want to get really into the weeds here, a lot of it is Coinbase. I mean, Coinbase is just all over this thing. Here, let's type it in. Coinbase. Boom. 110 mentions. I don't know if you guys can see that, but 110 mentions of Coinbase. And what we can take out when you read it is that Coinbase is actually taking a lot of the top line revenue of Circle. So we can see this US sort of stranglehold going for what's called regulatory capture. And that's when they basically, an established company goes to the regulators and says, hey, you got to put these onerous rules in place that are super expensive because only we can afford that. Startups will never be able to afford compliance, and that means they'll never be able to compete with our monopoly. That is what regulatory capture is, and that's very much what Circle is pursuing both in the US and obviously under MiCA rules. Now, I thank WazzCrypto for just putting together this image for me, but as of today, due to MiCA, we're seeing Binance, we're seeing Kraken. They're all basically saying you got to get the fuck out of USDT. This is for Europeans, just to be crystal clear, but they can no longer choose which of these companies they want to hold their stable assets in. Obviously, there's a lot of other dollars, but I've kind of covered they're not as mature and there is increased risk and they all have trade-offs. But when we're looking at the one versus the other, USDT got the shit end of the stick here because USDC was very involved in the MiCA rules and they basically inserted them there. Basically, regulatory capture, as I just described. So we have this really weird event where Europeans are waking up and they're like, yeah, I really actually preferred Tether and now I'm getting less optionality in how I can hold my money and isn't this antithetical? So we have this kind of stinky thing going on and let's just suffice it to say the fight is just beginning. It's far from over. Tether has a lot of money and Paulo Arduino, the CEO, has actually made his first trip to the United States recently and has been appearing over and over again in Washington. So he was not able to attend the White House meeting because he's not a U.S. citizen, but he's there. He's well-funded, and there's no doubt that, more is to come from this. Now, I covered the Genius Act a little while ago. That passed the Senate, but now it's in the House, and there's this whole Stable Act, which is kind of the same thing, but also not. And it's pretty clear that we're going to get a stablecoin bill. And these things are going to be locked in. And I do think this will unlock a lot of features for banking, for finance in general. The blockchain is simply better. The previous systems are 100 years old. They're built before computers. There's really, just to boil it down, we're just digitizing finance the same way we digitized information with the internet. It's happening to finance now with value, and that is because of the security guarantees of blockchain. This isn't all that crazy. There's a lot of BS that surrounds it all, but this is simply the digitization of finance. So all these things are happening. The Stable Act is basically a twist of the Genius Act, but we can see one's coming from the Senate, which is Genius, Stables is in House, and something in between will be mixed upon. Now, you could be bored by these acts. I don't know, but I go back to my boy Perplexity and I'm like, all right, what's the difference? And quite frankly, it's a little bit of a push and a pull between state ownership versus federal ownership. And I don't know, very quick overlook makes me feel like there are some better protections inside of the Genius bill, like reserve requirements, mandates one-to-one fiat high-quality asset backing, focuses on compliance, and we have Genius Act on the left, Stable on the right. So I think if this is something that you care about, it's very easy to bang into an AI and get a little breakdown on. But again, a lot of it is really state versus federal onus, emphasizes transparency, but does not address bankruptcy and asset segregation. To me, this is a very scary thing. Bankruptcy from the stablecoin issuer. If you're holding that stablecoin, where the fuck do you stand? So in the Genius bill, we have strong protections, including segregation of customer assets and priority claims in bankruptcy cases. You want these priority claims. Trust me, I've gone through bankruptcy. And if you're not having those, you're just out of luck. So there are a lot of ebbs and flows, pushes and pulls, and massaging to be done between these things. But suffice it to say, we are moving towards a world where stablecoins are going to be a thing. You'll likely see blockchain embedded directly into applications on your phone. You might not even know you're using them. We're going to see more embedded wallets, which means a Web3 wallet in an app. So you really just access it through your app login. These aren't the greatest things for storing your net worth, right? You're not sovereign necessarily. But if you're just going to move some money around and whatever, they're way better. You don't need to deal with seed phrases. You don't need to worry about somebody trying to murder you for your money. And they can have a 2 of 3 multi-sig where the company can help you recover those private keys in the wallet. So we are going to see a lot of that. And all of this is to say blockchain will be abstracted away. You will be sending stable value, cryptocurrencies over these apps inside their Web3 wallets. You won't really control it in the same way you do your MetaMask wallet. It will feel a lot more like Zelle or Venmo. And speaking of Zelle, I believe it's going away. So, you can see that they tried to take their current mechanisms and put it digitally, and it didn't work well for them. Turns out the onus was too much on the bank for scams and frauds, and they didn't want to deal with it. And scams and frauds in cryptocurrency, well, that's the user's problem. Hopefully we'll build more robust mechanisms around that and train people to be a little bit more aware of phishing attempts and hacks and all that jazz. With all that being said, These are really big times for the world. In the same way the Venetians came up with the receipt, which moved it from single point accounting, where basically a king would keep the ledger and say, you owe me X amount of dollars, and there's nothing you could do about it because they'd kill you if you disagreed, to the Venetian receipt, which said, hey, we made a transaction, you have a receipt, you have a proof of the transaction. This is of a similar vein. We're opening up the capabilities. When you have on-chain finality, when you can settle exchanges and deals and purchase orders, whatever, transactions within a block, you can create robust algorithmic transaction sets. We see things like flash loans where you can take out a loan, make a purchase, repay the loan, all within a same block. So that means unlike Ethereum, let's say a 10-second execution, or Solana, you can do a complex financial transaction almost instantaneously. They call it atomicity, which is atomic points in time, that it basically happens at the same moment. And that is going to allow us to scale. Plug this into robotics, plug this into AI. I mean, all of this digitization now has access to the financial system with the Stablecoin Act, with everything going on with stable coins. They will be able to touch the fiat capabilities, obviously cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin getting its own monetary adoption. They're in a bit of a different world, but this is a moment in financial history and just honestly UX, user experience, that is a major shift. So it's all pretty fascinating. I hope this wasn't too much. Like, I kind of went into this like, dude, you're going to start from like way, way back. But there's more to unpack. I mean, I could do an entire thing on just the Genius Act versus the Stables build, but it's a lot. So with that being said, good luck out there. Hopefully this market uptick is a signal that Liberation Day isn't going to be as rough as we thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be like Gary Gensler protecting investors. But best of luck to all of us. Good luck to you, and I'll see you tomorrow.